I never knew betrayal had a scent until the day my husband's will was read, smelling faintly of my daughter-in-law's expensive jasmine perfume, masking the absolute stench of greed. I sat in the polished oak chair of the lawyer's office, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to maintain the quiet dignity I had cultivated over 40 years of marriage. Before I tell you how this jasmine-scented nightmare unfolded, and how I turned my deepest humiliation into my greatest victory, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from today. Tell me your city or your country, because I want to know how far the truth can travel when a woman finally decides to speak it. My name is Clara. I am 62 years old, and for the entirety of my adult life, I have been a self-employed copywriter. While my late husband, Thomas, built an empire out of sound, designing cutting-edge microphones and acoustic equipment for Hollywood studios and global music producers, I sat in my small home office, crafting advertising copy, writing slogans, and piecing together words to pay our early mortgages. I loved my quiet life. I loved the clatter of my keyboard while Thomas soldered wires in the garage. We built everything together. But when pancreatic cancer took him in a brutal, rapid 4-month sweep, my world shattered. The will reading was supposed to be a mere formality. Instead, it was an execution. Seated across from me was my only son, David, looking exhausted, and beside him sat his wife, Chloe. Chloe was 30 years old, flawlessly dressed in a tailored black suit that looked more suitable for a high-fashion magazine than a mourning period. She had always treated me with a suffocating, passive-aggressive sweetness, a kind of polite poison that left no visible marks but slowly paralyzed the victim. The lawyer, a stiff man named Harrison, cleared his throat and began to read. To my son David, I leave the entirety of Apex Audio Solutions, the patents, the manufacturing facilities, and the commercial real estate portfolio, valued at $28 million. David stared at the floor, chewing his lower lip. Chloe, however, adjusted her posture, her eyes gleaming with a triumphant light she didn't even bother to hide. And to my beloved wife, Clara, Harrison continued, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave, I leave this personal item along with my eternal gratitude. Harrison reached under his desk and placed an object on the table. It was a heavy, tarnished, vintage condenser microphone covered in a thin layer of dust. Next to it, he placed a sealed, plain white envelope. I stared at the microphone. It was the first prototype Thomas ever built, the one he promised we would keep on our mantle forever. But where was the security? Where was the provision for my future? Everything went to David. Everything went to Chloe. Chloe leaned over, a sickeningly sweet smile stretching across her face. "Oh, Clara," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "How sentimental. At least you can use it as a paperweight for those little freelance writing gigs you do. Or maybe you can finally record a podcast about how to be a lonely widow." David flinched, but didn't defend me. He just muttered, "Chloe, please, not now." I stood up slowly. I did not cry. I did not scream. I took the heavy microphone, slipped the envelope into my purse, and walked out into the cold November rain, my heart pulverized into dust. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Chloe wasted no time infiltrating my sanctuary. She began dropping by my house unannounced, ostensibly to check on me, but in reality to establish dominance. One Tuesday morning, I was sitting at my desk trying to focus on writing a brochure for a local dental clinic just to keep my mind occupied. The front door unlocked. Chloe had demanded a spare key from David for emergencies. She breezed into my hallway, carrying a box of organic, tasteless health food. "Clara, darling," she called out, stepping into my office without knocking. "I brought you some quinoa salads. You really need to watch your cholesterol at your age, especially now that you are all alone." I forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Chloe, but I am perfectly fine. I am just working on a project." She walked over to my desk, running a perfectly manicured finger over my laptop screen. "Still typing away for pennies, huh?" she sighed. "You know, David and I were talking. This house is far too big for you to maintain. You forgot to water the ferns on the porch. And yesterday David said you seemed confused on the phone. We are looking into a beautiful assisted living community. It has watercolor classes. You would not have to worry about a thing." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Confused? I had simply asked David what time he was coming over. There was no confusion. Chloe was laying the groundwork. She was building a narrative. She wanted the house, the last asset Thomas had put entirely in my name decades ago, though he had heavily mortgaged it recently to expand the business, a detail I was terrified of facing now that I had no income from his estate. "I am not moving, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice even. "I am 62, not 90. I run my own business." "Oh, right, your little writing hobby," she chuckled softly, a sound like glass breaking. "Well, darling, we just want you safe. We will talk about it more when David comes to assess the property value this weekend." She left, leaving behind the suffocating scent of jasmine and the terrifying realization that my daughter-in-law was actively trying to erase me from my own life. That evening, the silence of the house felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I sat on the living room rug, wrapped in Thomas's old flannel shirt, staring at the vintage microphone sitting on the coffee table. The plain white envelope rested beneath it. I had been too heartbroken to open it. I expected a sentimental goodbye letter, an apology for leaving me destitute because the business demanded all his capital. My hands trembled as I finally tore the seal. Inside, there was no letter of apology. There was a single, heavy piece of cardstock. Printed on it in Thomas's precise handwriting was a short phrase. "Words were always your weapon, Clara. Sound was mine. Listen to the silence." Beneath that phrase was a series of numbers, a combination code, and an address I recognized immediately. It was a private, secure storage facility across town. My pulse quickened. Thomas was a man of immense precision. He never did anything without a profound reason. I barely slept that night. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I drove to the facility. The air was crisp, biting at my cheeks as I entered the concrete building. I found the unit, punched in the code, and lifted the metal door. Inside, sitting alone on a metal shelf, was a black Pelican case, the kind Thomas used to transport highly sensitive audio equipment. I carried it to my car and drove to a secluded park overlooking the river. My breath caught in my throat as I unlatched the heavy plastic clips. Inside the case was a state-of-the-art encrypted laptop, a pair of studio-grade headphones, and a leather-bound notebook. I opened the notebook. The first page read, "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the worst has proven true." I had to leave the visible estate to David to trigger their arrogance. What you hold in this case is the real inheritance. The company is riddled with a cancer, and it is not the one that killed me. I put on the headphones, powered up the laptop, and clicked on the only folder on the desktop, labeled The Truth. There were dozens of high-definition audio files. You see, Thomas had spent the last 2 years of his life designing covert audio surveillance equipment for a government contract. Without telling anyone, he had tested the prototypes in his own boardroom, in the executive offices, and in the private lounges of Apex Audio Solutions. I clicked on a file dated 4 months before his death. Through the pristine, crystal-clear audio, I heard Chloe's voice. She was not speaking to David. She was speaking to Marcus, the company's chief financial officer. "Marcus, darling," Chloe's voice purred, dripping with a dark, sensual intimacy that made my skin crawl. "As soon as the old man croaks, David will sign whatever I tell him to. We keep skimming the top of the international sales, funnel it through the shell company in Cyprus, and David will never notice. He is too busy playing the grieving son." Marcus laughed softly. "And the wife? Clara?" I heard the clinking of ice in a glass. Chloe sighed, a sound of sheer boredom. "Clara is a pathetic, naive woman who plays with words all day. I have already started planting the seeds with David that her mind is slipping. I move a few things around her house, hide her keys, mention Alzheimer's casually. Within 6 months of Thomas dying, I will have her committed to the Willowbrook care home, sell her house, and we take everything. It is flawless." I sat in my car, the cold winter sun blinding me through the windshield, and I vomited into a plastic bag. My own daughter-in-law. She was not just cruel. She was a predator. She was actively stealing millions from the company Thomas built, sleeping with the CFO, and meticulously plotting to have me locked in a psychiatric facility to steal my home. And David, my sweet, easily manipulated David, was blind, leading himself to the slaughter. I listened to file after file. I heard David weeping in his office, completely overwhelmed by the business, while Chloe gaslit him, telling him he was failing and that only she and Marcus could handle the finances. I heard Chloe forging vendor contracts. I heard her mocking my grief while Thomas was literally dying in the hospice. I closed the laptop. My tears dried up. They did not evaporate into sadness. They solidified into pure, unadulterated rage. For 40 years, I had been the quiet copywriter. I wrote words that made people buy cars, toothpaste, and vacations. I understood the psychology of persuasion, the architecture of a narrative, and the exact sequence of information needed to destroy an opposing argument. Chloe thought I was a naive old woman. She was about to find out that a woman who has spent 4 decades manipulating human emotion through text is not someone you want to declare war against. The following days required an Oscar-worthy performance on my part. I returned to my house and began my counterattack. Chloe came over 3 times that week, continuing her campaign of madness. She would intentionally hide my reading glasses, then sigh dramatically when I could not find them. "Oh, Clara," she would say, her eyes wide with fake concern, "you are forgetting things again. I even scheduled a doctor to come visit you here at the house. Just a friendly grief counselor to evaluate your stress levels." I knew exactly what that meant. A paid-off doctor to sign preliminary papers for incompetence. But I played along. I let my hands shake. I looked confused. I let her believe she was winning. "Oh, Chloe," I whispered, looking down at my hands. "Maybe you are right. Maybe I am just too tired to handle all this." Her eyes flashed with predatory joy. "Don't you worry about a thing, Clara. David and I will take care of your finances. You just rest." As soon as she left, my confusion vanished. I marched to my desk. I pulled out my vintage typewriter alongside my laptop. I began to write. I wrote the most important copy of my life. I drafted legal notices utilizing Thomas's private lawyer, whose contact was in the notebook. Thomas had secretly structured a shadow holding company. The visible assets went to David, yes, but the voting rights, the absolute corporate control of Apex Audio Solutions were tied to the holding company, which Thomas had left entirely to me. David owned the building, but I owned the doors, the windows, and the ground it stood on. I was the silent, absolute dictator of the empire. I just needed to execute the paperwork, which I did, quietly and ruthlessly. The climax of my plan was set for the following Thursday. Chloe and David had arranged for the grief counselor to visit my home at noon. I knew Chloe would use this as the primary evidence to start the legal proceedings against me. I decided to change the venue. I used my authority as the new majority shareholder to call an emergency board meeting at Apex Audio Solutions at 11 in the morning. I sent the summons directly to Marcus, the CFO, and the other executives, bypassing David entirely. When Thursday arrived, I did not dress in my usual cozy cardigans. I went to a high-end boutique and bought a tailored, sharp, navy blue business suit. I put on my pearls. I pulled my silver hair back into a severe, elegant chignon. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a woman who owned the room before she even stepped into it. I walked into the glass-walled boardroom of Apex Audio Solutions at exactly 11 o'clock. Marcus, the corrupt CFO, was sitting at the table looking annoyed. Several other board members were whispering. Then the door flew open, and David and Chloe rushed in. Chloe was furious. "What is the meaning of this?" Chloe snapped, glaring at the board members. "Who called this meeting? We have a doctor's appointment at Clara's house in an hour." I stepped out from the shadows of the corner, holding the heavy vintage microphone Thomas had left me. "I called the meeting, Chloe," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the acoustic panels of the room. "Please, take a seat." David stared at me, his jaw dropping. "Mom, what are you wearing? Why are you here? You are supposed to be resting. The doctor is coming." "Cancel the doctor, David," I replied, walking to the head of the table. I placed the vintage microphone in the dead center of the polished mahogany. "I am not confused. I am not slipping into dementia, and I am certainly not moving into Willowbrook so your wife can sell my home and launder the money through her offshore accounts." The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Chloe's face lost all its color. She let out a shrill, nervous laugh. "David, look at her. She is having a complete mental breakdown. Marcus, call security. This is exactly what the doctor warned us about." Marcus reached for his phone, but I pulled a sleek remote control from my pocket. "Thomas didn't just build microphones," I said, my voice steady, locking eyes with Chloe. "He built the sound system in this very room. And he built the surveillance system that has been recording every whisper in this office for the last 2 years." I pressed the button. The massive overhead studio speakers crackled to life. Suddenly, Chloe's voice, pristine and crystal clear, filled the room. "As soon as the old man croaks, David will sign whatever I tell him to. We keep skimming the top of the international sales, funnel it through the shell company in Cyprus, and David will never notice. He is too busy playing the grieving son." David physically stumbled backwards, hitting the glass wall. He looked at the speakers, then at Chloe, his eyes wide with a horror so profound it almost broke my heart. "Wait," Chloe stammered, her hands shaking violently. "That is an AI deepfake. Clara fabricated that. She works on computers all day. She is trying to frame me." I pressed the button again. Now the speakers played the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing, kissing, and Marcus's voice groaning. "You are brilliant, Chloe. David is an idiot. Come here." The audio of their physical affair echoed through the boardroom, undeniable, raw, and utterly devastating. Marcus turned the color of ash. He pushed his chair back and tried to stand, but his legs seemed to fail him. David let out a guttural sound, a mix of a sob and a scream. He looked at Chloe, the woman he had loved, the woman who had convinced him his own mother was losing her mind. "You," David choked out, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "You said my mother was sick. You said we needed to protect her. All this time you were sleeping with Marcus? You were stealing from my father?" Chloe backed away toward the door, her flawless facade completely shattered. "David, baby, please. It is taken out of context. She is a manipulative old witch." I stepped forward. My posture was perfectly straight. "I am a copywriter, Chloe," I said coldly. "I know how to edit. I know how to spin a narrative. But I didn't have to edit a single second of these tapes. You wrote your own destruction. I just hit play." I turned to the remaining board members who were sitting in stunned silence. "Gentlemen, as of 9 o'clock this morning, the private holding company established by my late husband has activated its executive privilege. I own 60% of the voting shares of this entire corporation. My first act as majority shareholder is the immediate termination of Marcus from the position of CFO. My second act is directing our legal team to hand over all financial records, along with these audio files, to the federal authorities for criminal embezzlement." Marcus bolted. He literally ran out of the boardroom, leaving his briefcase behind. Chloe tried to follow him, but David stepped in her way. His sorrow had instantly morphed into a cold, hard rage. "We are getting a divorce," David said, his voice trembling but remarkably firm. "You will leave my house today with nothing but the clothes on your back. If you try to fight me, I will make sure you spend the next 10 years in a federal prison." Chloe looked at me, pure venom in her eyes. "You think you won, Clara? You are just a lonely, bitter old woman playing business." I smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I am not lonely, Chloe. I have the truth on my side, and I am about to be very, very busy. Security, escort this woman off my property." The security guards, who had gathered outside the glass doors upon hearing the commotion, stepped in and grabbed Chloe by the arms. She kicked and screamed, cursing my name as they dragged her out. The smell of her jasmine perfume lingered for a moment, then was sucked out by the air conditioning, leaving the room crisp and clean. David collapsed into a chair, putting his head in his hands, weeping uncontrollably. I walked over to him, my heart aching for my son. He had been a fool, yes. He had been weak and easily manipulated. But he was my boy. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mom," he sobbed, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry I let her treat you like that. I thought I was losing you too. I thought your mind was going." "I know, David," I said softly. "I know. But we are going to fix this. We are going to fix everything your father built." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal battles and corporate restructuring. Chloe tried to hire a ruthless divorce attorney, but the moment they heard the audio tapes and saw the forensic accounting that proved her embezzlement, they dropped her as a client. She ended up taking a plea deal to avoid jail time, walking away with absolutely nothing, heavily in debt from legal fees. Marcus was indicted for corporate fraud and is currently awaiting trial. As for me, I didn't just go back to my quiet home office. I took the corner office at Apex Audio Solutions. I hired a brilliant new financial team. I used my decades of experience in copywriting and marketing to rebrand the company, launching a new line of accessible, high-quality microphones for independent podcast creators, honoring Thomas's original vision. David works under me now. I made him step down as CEO and take a position as head of product development, where his true talents lie, away from the finances. He is attending therapy, healing from the deep psychological abuse Chloe inflicted upon him. He visits me every Sunday, and we sit on the porch drinking tea, surrounded by the ferns that I never once forgot to water. Sometimes I look at that vintage microphone sitting on my massive desk in the executive office. It reminds me that silence is a choice. Thomas used sound to capture the truth, but it was my words, my planning, and my absolute refusal to be a victim that brought that truth to light. They tried to throw me away in a dusty envelope, hoping I would quietly fade into the background. But they forgot that I am a writer, and a writer never lets the villain have the last word. To everyone watching this, I ask you a serious question. Have you ever let someone convince you that you were weak or crazy or invisible just because they were louder than you? How did you take your power back? Tell me your story in the comments below, because if my journey has taught me anything, it is that the most powerful voice in the room is often the one that has been quiet the longest. Subscribe to the channel if you believe that justice is best served cold. And remember, never underestimate a woman who knows exactly how to choose her words.